Hey everyone, and welcome to the Phileas Club. This is episode 140. We're in January 2020, and if you enjoy this show, you might want to think about supporting it on Patreon at patreon.com/the Phileas Club. The link is in the show notes. It takes a couple of minutes, and you will make everyone, including myself and yourself, happy. Enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Phileas Club, the show where we get people from around the world, actual people, like not journalists or, all right, but not that journalists aren't real people. They're real people, but like people on the street, like who live there and who don't do this for a living. We get those people together and we get them to tell you what's been happening and how they feel about it. So we don't have like the polished quality of traditional media. We're like guerrilla reporter type. No, we're not that either. But you get a sense of how people feel and think in different countries and about different things that are happening in the world. Like, for example, the impeachment story for Trump, or whatever the hell is happening in Germany these days. Because we have Matthias from Germany who's joining us. I'm Patrick Beja, and we also have Wendy from the US joining us. So there you go, transatlantic episode. Hello, Matthias. How's it going today?
Hello. Yes, I'm a real person. I'm not a synthetic. Thank you for noticing.
Not yet. It's happening slowly. So thanks for being on the show. You are in Germany. It's currently 4 p.m. for you?
Yes.
It is 5 p.m. for me because I'm in Finland. And it is an ungodly hour of the morning for Wendy in the frozen wastes of, where do you live again? Colorado?
Minnesota.
Right. That's the same thing, isn't it?
Close enough. They're super cool. Not at all.
I will confess that as much as Americans, I'm sure, mostly don't know where where European countries are on the map. I have no idea where most U.S. states are. I think I managed to do the Friends challenge of finding the names of all U.S. states a while back. I think I might be able to do it mostly, but I don't know where they are. It's like California, New York, Texas, and that's it. That's about it. Everything else could be anywhere. I wouldn't know. So
well, there's East Coast, there's West Coast, and there's Flower Country. So
right.
There.
That's
I'm
the
in Flower
States.
Country, just below our lovely neighbors, Canada. So that's where I am.
Yeah, so it is frozen. So
Hi,
at least there's that. Also, Florida. I know Florida. I know a couple.
Hawaii, Hawaii and Alaska.
I know Hawaii. I know Alaska. I know Arizona. There are a few. All right. I know a few, but not many. So yeah, I know where they are mostly. Those few. Nevada, because Las Vegas. I've been to a couple of them, and I know those. Utah, so many. Actually, I know almost all of them.
You know as much as... There's many Americans who don't know anything west or east, of the Mississippi, because it gets crowded and it gets a little confusing. So you're not alone.
And the Mississippi is a river, correct? Yes. Right.
Yeah, it's
there
a river. Yeah. Very big one.
So I'm originally from France. I'm currently in Finland, but I think we're going to be talking about what's happening in France, mostly in my segment. But what do you think, Matthias? Should we start with the U.S.? The U.S. is always like imposing its happenings on the world. So should we bend to the might of the American empire?
Get the elephant out of the room, I guess.
Yeah, because I would like to know what you guys think about all of it as well.
All right. Yeah. Well, let's get started.
Do you want me to start, or do you want to lead me?
You can. I mean, you can choose whatever has been making the news in your lovely country. I'm guessing it might be one thing, but it might actually be another thing. I try not to influence my guests, so you decide. So we're going to be talking about Kobe Bryant, right? That's the main topic.
Of course. Well, I would say there's three things that are kind of the most dominant, but that has changed over time, right? We used to have maybe one or two things we could focus on at least for a day or two, and it's 20 every day. So I don't know how fair it is to say three, but I'm going to pick the three that I have paid attention to. So how about that?
All right, let's do that.
And that is, we're going to start with the sad one first. So Kobe Bryant's death on Sunday morning. It was just so sad. I have a 14-year-old kid. He loves basketball. And, he's pretty proud of not crying. And he just was sobbing. It was so heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking, partly because, he's so famous here, right? Like every kid, I actually helped coach a little basketball team with my 11-year-old and his friends. And every time a kid makes an awesome faraway shot or shoots a half-court shot, they yell Kobe. And every time a kid throws a piece of garbage into a garbage can in a classroom, they say Kobe. It's like in the vernacular of every young kid, for the most part, to say his name. Even though he retired from the NBA in 2016, he's very much in the consciousness. And so for him to die suddenly and tragically with, his daughter on board the helicopter. So maybe you aren't familiar with what happened, but he, and I want to say there were 9 total on this helicopter, took off Sunday morning in LA, and there's some hills around LA, and there was a lot of fog, and they're not exactly positive, but I think the pilot was thinking he was past the mountains. He was trying to get under the fog to see, and thought he was headed back into, clear space, and was going sort of full speed, and there was one more mountain that he did not see. Wow. And so, that's what was so strange to everyone, is you would usually slow down in those conditions. So they were pretty sure. He's a really experienced pilot too, that he just thought he was over that last hill, and he was not. So they crashed going full speed into this hillside, and the debris, the area of where the damage took place was 600, I don't know, feet or meters wide. It was quite a thing. So just very sad, affected a lot of people. It's one of those things, though, in relationship to my two other topics, is it's really heartbreaking on one hand, but it also is one of those unifiers, and we have so few things left, I feel like, sometimes as Americans, that we can all just be a little sad about, or that we could all get behind, or it's like a collective grieving. And there's some really cool stories out of LA of just how people have connected over this and been good. And, that's often what comes out of tragedy, is sort of the best side of people shows up, I think, because they put down their guards, or they, they're feeling human emotions. So
it's
anyway,
interesting.
So that's a nice note to start on. Pretty
sad.
So you guys heard about it, I assume, yeah?
Well, at least for me, yes. In France, it was very much, it was making the news. I don't think like the NBA is the biggest, basketball is not the biggest sport in France, but it's definitely there, and people know about it. And Kobe Bryant's name was well known in the country. And even for us, it was like weirdly shocking, I guess. There's all the elements of a tragedy, and he was young, and his daughter, and all the, like, it's so, and it's someone that I think there was this one story that a journalist mentioned, something that happened. He was accused of sexual assault in 2003, and she was like fired, but then they took it back. They took him back. They took her back, the journalist. But that was the only thing that anyone dared to say something bad about this whole thing, about Kobe Bryant. So it seems like he's universally beloved, and that plays into the
and all really interesting people. They're complicated. No one is all amazing and good, and he has, and I don't know the whole thing with that, but there was definitely a moment there that was not shining or stellar in his life, and there are people who have been hurt.
So is that something that people like? Is that something that people?
I think some of it is back in the day,
real?
there was only, you didn't know anything about anybody. Now you know everything about everyone. And so we used to just be able to put someone on a pedestal and
yeah, but I mean, in the case of this thing,
laundry.
In the case of this thing, do people think that it was do people think it's real that he actually assaulted or raped that woman? Because if that's the case, it seems weird that, yeah, but it was in 2003. It was only one time, it seems like it would be talked about. So do people think, yeah, it happened and they settled it? Or do people think, well, we don't really know that it happened. It was a lawsuit and we don't know.
Right. I think it's more of the second. And I also think people's institutional memory is pretty short. And then we have just the reality of how humans grieve, especially collective grieving. Just think about in your own lives or people if someone passes away, they could have been the biggest jerk in your life. And you suddenly are under new obligation where you're just like, we don't talk bad about the dead. We kind of, and I don't know if that's everywhere in the world, but I feel like that is very much a thing where
it's everywhere.
Automatically, like sacred ground, you don't really touch it. And so for someone to bring that up, I think took a lot of courage, and people, of course, have been freaking out about it because we want someone to be all good. We don't want, and then if there's sort of a taint of bad, then we think they're all bad. And that's a very black and white human
there's taint
brain
and taint.
thinking
This
situation. And I think
I think she can hear me when she's speaking.
Is you just don't want to be interrupted in your grieving, but yet the reality is the reality. And also, truly, I mean, I know that saying, "Oh, that was 2003," but like 2013, he might have not had as much a problem as he would in 2017, 18, and 19. So definitely things have changed, with Me Too, etc.
Yeah, I think you can't hear me when I'm speaking if you're speaking. So I was asking something and you couldn't hear me.
Oh, sorry. No, I couldn't hear you.
All right. So, yeah, all right. Let's not spend the whole episode on Kobe Bryant. Just asking Matthias, did you hear about it in Germany or not?
Yes, it made the news. It even got those breaking news notifications you get on your phone from the different news outlet apps. Even those popped up all the time. So the NBA isn't something that is reported on in the major newspaper that heavily, I think, except for, of course, the sports sections, I guess, but nothing that makes the headlines usually, unless it's Dirk Nowitzki retiring or something. And other than that, this one actually made all the headlines as well over here, so everyone heard about it.
All right, well, there you go. You'd think maybe not, but actually it does. It does make the news here too. All right, second topic, Wendy.
Okay, so I mean, impeachment is impeachment, right? Is everyone following?
I think yes. I think most people know what it is.
Exhausting. It's exhausting because, well, first of all, one thing you guys might find interesting is the Senate is finishing up deliberations. So what happened was we have two bodies, that the House of Representatives, and they're sort of voted in based on population. They're like the People's House, the lower house. If you want to compare it to the British system, we're like the lower house of Parliament. That's the lower house. That's called the House. And then the Senate is sort of the Lords in the English system of just like they're they get elected every 6 years instead of 2. They're supposedly more dignified, supposedly. It's kind of like the grown-ups are supposed to, be presiding. So what's happened is the House impeached, sent articles of impeachment. They voted to impeach the president, but they don't have the power to remove him from office or to decide on the case specifically. That is why it's then sent to this other body called the Senate. So the Senate has spent the last week hearing arguments, 2 weeks, hearing arguments from the Trump side of things, and then also hearing the case that the House has presented, that they have, decided he's impeachable and should be removed from office. So here's the crazy part about this, is all of these senators have to sit in these rooms and listen to everybody talk, lots of lawyers talking, and they cannot use their phones. They cannot have contact with the outside world. It's age old. Shut the doors, lock it. No, reporters cannot, they have to use pens and paper. There is no phones, there's no recording, there's no nothing. But there is broadcast a public, on public news and radio stations, the words. So the audio of what's happening. I'm sure there's some video too. I haven't seen any, but so there's just one source coming out and you can listen. And so NPR is the national public radio here. And it's just been playing 100% of the time. It's maddening. So what you do when you tune in is you just hear lawyers arguing exact opposite things. You don't hear a lot of sense. And I don't know how much time either of you have spent in courtrooms. I haven't, but I feel like I might have a sense of this. And you guys might have seen some TV dramas.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of TV and movies.
How lawyers operate and their whole job. It's not about truth necessarily. It's about proving their client innocent or guilty, et cetera, et cetera. And it just feels as divided and partisan as always. And that's the hard part. As a citizen, I sit, I listen, I read, I'm trying to pay attention. This is historical. It's the third time in all of our history that this type of thing has happened. It's tricky. It's tricky and boring.
So it's boring, and it's, as you mentioned, they argue the exact opposite of everything, which is what has been happening in every aspect of political life, it seems, in the US, more even than in other countries, it feels like. But is there anything beyond that? Because surprisingly, we haven't really heard much of it in France, I think. I guess I didn't actually realize that the House had passed it, and that now it was really that step, the senators deciding what would happen. So we're like, oh yeah, there's this impeachment thing happening. It's the crazy US people doing stuff. Matthias, is that also your feeling about it?
We have all the major milestones, I guess, those are reported all over the news. And if you are looking at the special in-depth political section, you will find the details. And if you will listen to political podcasts or news podcasts, they might discuss it and the strategy and tactics behind it. But in general, most people, if anything, only noticed the major milestones and not the day-to-day activities. Or if something groundbreaking happens, for example, the alleged upcoming book of John Bolton, something like that right. Makes the news. But other than that, not really. It's more like a background noise that pops up every now and then.
I guess the way we look at it is, well, it seems like it's 100% not going to happen in the Senate, so we don't really even need to pay attention. And then there was this potential, like, it's now 95% going to happen because of this Bolton thing and the heaviness of the accusation and the clarity of the confirmation of the accusations. So I guess what I'm wondering is it just that and that's it? Or is it is it just the arguments and people saying, one is saying, this is blue, and the other one saying, no, it's actually yellow, shut up. And that's it? Or is it something more coming out of it?
Well, here you would say, is it blue or red? Everything is blue or red here. So, I think, okay, so it can seem that way. It seems that way from here as well. Like, well, everyone will protect Trump. There's no way they're going to vote that he is removed. But here's where, if you're paying attention at all, I'm going to describe it as a sickening feeling. And maybe it's what anyone would feel with no real experience with the legal system, feels when they find out, some guy's a good dad lost part of his custody from his kid because his ex-wife had a better lawyer, or, just sort of the unfairness feeling of like, wait, hold on. Because what's actually happening with the Bolton thing in particular is that the Senate is refusing to call any witnesses. They are saying, well, that's what the House was supposed to have done, was call all these witnesses. Well, the House called amazing witnesses, but all of them were tertiary because everyone within the circle of the president who would have had direct conversations with him about any of things have refused to be subpoenaed, have refused to be to testify. So we have no first-hand knowledge of any of those things. And that's the Senate saying, well, we don't have the first-hand knowledge. Well, what's so amazing about Bolton coming out is he was in those rooms. He has documentation. He was talking to the president about Ukraine. He has words from the president's mouth. I mean, he's a key witness and he's willing to testify. But these senators, who the majority are Republicans, they have to have a certain number of votes to get these witnesses in there. They're standing in the way. So this feeling of powerlessness and partisanship winning the day rather than just I feels like the basic right to have a witness say what he heard, or it's just maddening. And so that's part of it, is this sick, frustrating feeling.
So why did Bolton not come out when the first house was doing the thing, when they could have called him? And what is the justification of the senators for not calling him now? Or I guess they're just saying, well, could have been called before, but...
Right. And that is what they're saying as their justification. Well, you guys didn't do your job, and you just want the president out. You're trying that the lawyers for the president's argument is this is trying to hijack the election where we voted Donald Trump in as president. Let's just be reminded that he lost by 3 million popular votes. Just love to remind people of that. But that's what their justification is as senators. But now, okay, so the Bolton thing, what happened was the House attempted to subpoena someone close to Bolton who refused. So the president has pretty much instructed anyone around him to refuse. So the House would have to take him to court. So think lawyers everywhere, right? So this would cause this big, long legal battle to get this guy to speak. Bolton said the same thing. You can subpoena me, but I'm not going to do it. And so instead of getting caught up in the big legal battles of all of these people, they went with the witnesses that they could get. So Bolton reserving this information till now is interesting because his book has this data in it, right? His book has to be pre-screened by someone, I forget which agency, but to make sure nothing's confidential is being revealed. There's some checks on that. So people knew about this as early as December, the stuff he's bringing out now, or we're learning about now. So it's fascinating. It's a little dramatic, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
But wait, you're saying that Bolton said he didn't want to testify? Now you're...
He did for the House investigation, and now he's saying he's willing for the Senate.
Okay, that's weird. All right.
Yeah. Something's going on.
All right, but we're still at this stage, and I guess they want to wrap it up fairly soon, so we'll have an answer, like, did I hear by the end of the week? And it's unlikely that they're going to vote to impeach, because if they do, then that's impeachment. That doesn't mean he's removed, but there's another step, I think.
Yeah, they have to then vote to remove him, and that's the thing that is doubtful that a Republican-dominated Senate would do.
Okay. All right. So, and that should be wrapped up by the end of the week, I believe. That's what we're hearing.
Right. Well, if they're willing to let new witnesses come, which would then be this, Bolton, that would change some things. But that's the question at the moment. Will they have any witnesses called?
All right. We'll try to get someone who's closer to the right in the U.S., maybe Tony, because that's always Tony, at some point to get their impression on this as well. But there you go. That's the second story, and regale us with the last one.
Well, and yeah, I'm going to hand it right over to you guys after I mention it because it is a worldwide situation. There's just a number of Americans now affected, but the coronavirus is this example of, wow, how interconnected we are, especially with flying on airplanes, and just sort of that feeling of instability that comes from that, which ties into a little bit of the impeachment thing. I think for the rest of the world, you're going, okay, your government's doing this weird stuff. For Americans, we have these three parts of the government that are supposed to balance each other out. And that is 100% in question right now. Does the Senate or does the Congress or legislative branch have any power over the executive, or is it all president forever? And so that feels very, tenuous. And then you have the coronavirus pop up and you're like, we're all going to die. That's a little bit of maybe how we're all feeling.
Just to be clear, while we are looking at the impeachment trial from a distance and with little interest, I think part of it is because there's this feeling that the U.S. has kind of gone crazy with Trump. And this is not a partisan thing to say. It's just the disconnect between people in the U.S. and maybe people who are sympathetic to Trump and the rest of the world. Because even though this is obviously the point of the show and a point of pride of trying to listen to people and listen to how they feel and not going in thinking what they think is invalid, there is, I think, very much the feeling that even in France or anywhere in Europe, I think, and many other parts of the world, regardless of if you're from the left or the right, the U.S. has become, I hesitate to say crazy because that's really charged, but if you talk casually, it's like, yeah, it's the U.S., it doesn't make sense. And it's Trump, and that doesn't make sense either. Not in the sense that we don't understand why he's here, but it's just insane that it extends to that level of partisanship. Maybe even saying partisanship is better than Trump, because the fact that this is getting to, it seems like objectively it's getting to a point where the facts are difficult to dispute, and still the faithfulness of the party is infallible, which becomes problematic from a democratic point of view. And we are very much aware of that aspect of it, even though we are like insensitive to it anymore because we're like, there's nothing you can do. They're insane.
There's also something else, I think, because just a few days ago, Trump announced, or the administration announced, their probable solution for the Middle East crisis they have been talking about. And everything the US does seems to be tainted by these proceedings, because apart from the fact if that's a good deal or not a good deal, or if it's working or not, you always have in the back of your mind, maybe that's just something they do to take attention away from this impeachment thing. So whatever the US is doing, it seems to be a way to distract from other issues. And that's not just something, or at least that's something I have the feeling this administration is doing more than other administrations. I am not saying that's all true, and I'm not saying that necessarily this timing wasn't just bad timing in this case, but it's something a lot of people are thinking about over here whenever they hear anything out of the US. Might this be just a distraction?
Well, and a great example of that is the killing of General Soleimani in Iraq. We have Trump's tweets from when anyone else has been president, Obama mainly, saying, oh, you're just trying to distract us by doing something with Iran. So we have this like an idea he already knows in his head, and the impeachment starts happening. And then we take out a general that for 2 presidents. So we're talking 16 years. We've watched the guy. We've been very careful. There are reasons they have not taken him out before, because it's essentially an act of war. And it was done kind of knee-jerk. And you talk to anyone or listen to anyone who, has done these things for years and knows all the protocol, it's like chaos. I think chaos is maybe a great word. And so it's hard to differentiate because it feels like chaos.
And again, I'm not saying that other administrations didn't do this, because controlling the news cycle and agenda setting, that's something that every politician or every government is doing or trying to do. But for a lot of people, I think Trump is just that guy that would potentially do this just because he's Trump. That's just the feeling a lot of people have, I think. And some of the newspapers also jump on that bandwagon and question almost everything the US is doing with that in mind.
I think the killing.
Okay.
The killing in of the general was definitely looked at as, okay, now he's actually gone insane, because I don't think there haven't been many. I'm not going to say never, but there haven't been many this unprovoked acts of almost war or full-on war like this. And that was, maybe it was a gamble, and he knew that, Iran wouldn't retaliate too strongly, and he was okay with the way they would retaliate, and it was a calculated risk. And maybe even I'm willing to make room for the possibility that it was necessary. But it just feels, again, completely crazy. And that plan in the Middle East is also looked at as it's it's not a good plan. It's like it feels like the product of Trump's ego, which is this thinking that if he wills it strongly enough, it will happen, which, he was elected to the presidency of the U.S., so you never know. Maybe he will manage to establish peace in the Middle East. But yeah, it doesn't seem... So that's the prism through which we look at all of this. And I want to go back to the coronavirus, but you wanted to say something, Wendy, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, just one last kind of, I guess it's the foundation of... Trump is clearly not my favorite president, right? But Trump isn't the key. He just is Teflon. And that's because, anyone else has maybe some shame about some things, or they would step down. I mean, the reason Nixon wasn't actually removed from office is because he stepped down, because the evidence was clear. And I just don't think Trump has a limit. And that is frightening when you think of the power that he has. And the Congress is just relinquishing more and more power to the president. And the irony is the next one could be a Democratic president, and that president has all the power now. The whole point is that we sort of create this balance. But let me just throw out one underlying thing, and I think this is partly why Trump is so popular with a lot of folks who have felt like they've gotten left behind, is because there's a lot of people in America who are left behind. So you look at this sort of chaos of all of this, and some studies have come out recently that are not related to the timing of anything, and it's 1 in every 5 American children is living in poverty, is food insecure. Like, we are supposedly one of the wealthiest countries in the world with all this power, and we have hungry kids. Like, what is happening? So I think there's really some distraction from that's part of the, the media cycle, or something shiny gets our attention, or whatever it might be. We kind of don't deal with our own problems. And so you have those folks who feel like he finally represents them. And so they dig in even more, because it's more than just like, I like this guy or I like his policies. Some people like him, but they think he's scary a little too. It's that people are feeling a little unsafe or unsettled, and somebody represents them. So that's my fear, is historically that's never been a good thing. And taking care of your problems in your own country really matters.
But I can understand that they felt those people, the poor, would feel he represented them initially because he was outside the system, and he was a big middle finger, as we've said many times, to the establishment. He's been in office for 3 years now. 3 years. I guess there's a big component of all of this, which I always have to remind myself of, which is, even if he doesn't do anything for those people, which maybe he did and I don't know, but it doesn't feel to me like he did, the key is that they hate the other people, the other guys, even more. And that is, it kind of is starting a little bit here as well, but it's not as strong. And the fact that we have multiple parties is a key way of making sure that doesn't metastasize in that way, because you can shop for ideas you think are interesting, even if your the party you like is not the best. Then there's an adjacent party that you think, okay, I can look at these guys and maybe look at what they're doing. It's not just the saint and their arch enemy, which are available to you, even intellectually, you know. So,
right, 100% right.
All right.
Since you mentioned the coronavirus, just as we're recording this, a news alert popped up that Lufthansa, the German airline, has canceled all flights to and from China until February 9th because of the coronavirus, just at the moment. And since you mentioned it, I thought I'd bring it up.
It's definitely been a big story in France as well. I think the way we've thought about it collectively was first the uncertainty and a little bit of panic, of course, of, oh my God, this is another, I don't know if you call it like that in English, the SRAS, S-R-A-S. In French, it's like
SARS. Yeah,
SARS. Yeah, there you go, SARS.
Yeah.
So another one of those, or another avian flu, or anything, something like that. But we were kind of like, oh, let's kind of not wait and see, but we don't know much, and that's frightening. But now the second wave is a little bit of, all right, this is not the end of the world. It has a death rate of 2.5%, and those people were older or fragile in some way. The regular flu does just as much damage, if not more, and people don't freak out about that. So there's kind of a calming, not everyone, but there are a number of reports that have been focusing on, you know what, this is not panic worthy. We keep an eye on it. It's important. We need to make sure it doesn't get out of hand, but we're not panicking. So I don't know if, in Germany it's been the same approach.
Kind of, because we also have, like, I think 3 cases. There was one case, and now they're looking at the people in his family. But I think most of the news reports are rather analytical about this. So it's not really panic, but it's more like, well, this is happening in China, and then there is this case in Germany, these 3 cases in the US, and maybe in Canada or somewhere, but that's about it. So it's not really panic in the same sense as it was with SARS or what was the avian flu a few years back. So it's not really panic. I think it's the same.
Yeah, that's good to hear. There's definitely an economic angle to the reporting as well, because the province, the town, first of all, we discovered that there was this town of 10 million people that no one had heard about, and it's like, well, there you go, that's China for you. But also it has a lot of apparently automotive factories, and that has an effect on French industry, of course. And then there's a number of the economic aspect is also being reported on. But what about the U.S.? Is it constant panic on 24-hour news networks selling you fear?
It's not, but I think it's.
I'm almost disappointed.
It probably is. I don't watch those. But I think what it is sort of the idea of, the airplane as the transmission of these things is a little bit frightening, right? Because we use them so much and we travel so much. And anyway, so one recent piece of news is that 200 Americans who were living in that area, Wuhan, right, is the epicenter of where the outbreak was, have all been flown back to the United States. And so they are in Alaska just now arriving, and all the protocols to make sure everyone is healthy before they enter into the country. But we did have a couple, I think there was a case in California, and some other things. So it's just how interconnected we are, I think, can be amazing and scary with this sort of thing.
Yeah, that's been also part of the conversation around it. It's the fact that an outbreak can become a pandemic very quickly because of all of it, which even, with SARS 15 years ago wasn't as much the case. It was, to an extent, but not as much. I think that is the realization that's coming out of it. And very quickly it can become a worldwide thing. So that's interesting as well. Other things from France, the strikes, which, by the way, we did a special on strikes last episode. So go check that out if you want to know why the French love to strike so much and how they approach that habit. But the strikes are kind of, as Kasim predicted in that episode, kind of calming down a little bit, not in intensity, because the people who are still striking, of course, are very determined, but there are less people going on strikes and going on demonstrations and stuff like that. There was firefighters who went on a demonstration yesterday, I believe, and it was a kind of a shocking sight because it was firefighters facing policemen and women, and that is kind of two infrastructure representatives of an infrastructure that is well respected, well, for the firefighters at least, but even for the police forces, I most people would say that, although that's going down with those latest issues. But yeah, so that was a little bit of a shock, but now we're kind of expecting the reform, the retirement reform, to go through, to be discussed a little bit, maybe delayed in the parliament by the opposing parties. But mostly, it seems like the most likely outcome is that it's going to go through. It doesn't mean that people like it, but that's how the game works, I suppose. And yeah, we'll see. There is the kind of safety thought that if it's really bad, then a future government could alter it. So there is still the democratic system that could be leveraged there. But also, most people expect that no matter how bad it is, it wouldn't be altered because it's such a cluster truck of a reform that it seems like no one will want to touch it again. But so yeah, that's been happening as well, and I think the virus and this are the two main topics. I'm guessing that the strikes weren't the main bit of news anywhere other than France. But if that's not the case, then Matthias, I would be curious to hear what you think about this.
So it's not really making the news anymore because it's has been going on for such a long time. Kind of the same thing as with Brexit, because no one is talking about Brexit anymore because that's boring. That's old news that has been going on for so long. No one cares anymore. And
in a couple of days, everyone will be talking about it again.
It's the same with the strikes in France. Although those videos of the firefighters clashing with the police yesterday made quite a lot of waves on social media, and those were shocking videos, I guess, because they were really going at it, and we are kind of used to police brutality, I guess, in France, but that was quite shocking for a lot of people, seeing that they are going at firefighters, and not just, though they're kind of different than the quote-unquote normal protesters, I guess. So But other than that, it pops up every now and then if there is something they're about to change in terms of legislation, but not really. It's just boiling under the boiling point, I guess, so no one really notices it anymore.
Okay. I guess it's my setup that is weird because you didn't hear me when I was talking here either. I changed a little bit of my setup and it's going very strangely. So, all right. Doesn't matter too much, but now I know the wonders of podcast production. Yeah, okay, so it's been going on so much. And so I guess I'm going to ask about this a little bit more because I have to be fair about this. There's an air of police brutality in France, like this doesn't even surprise you anymore? That's how you understand what's happening?
Well, I think that in Europe, French police is considered rather brutal in comparison. With the recent clashes, there have been a lot of cases of those non-lethal ammunition, those rubber balls or whatever, which injured a lot of protesters, and that made a lot of news. And that's just something that I don't know. Maybe it's just me and my bubble that notices that, but that has been noted that there were a lot of heavy clashes with the police.
Well, it's definitely not just you and your bubble. I mean, has been a big point of contention in France as well, as we discussed in last episode. It absolutely is a thing, but I was surprised that you would put it that way, I guess, and it seems to apply not just to this quote unquote conflict, but a general view of the police forces here. So I was surprised.
I think statistically there are actually a lot of cases on with the French police, but I'm not sure. I remember reading something about it a while ago, but it's I don't have it ready, so I can't quote these statistics or anything. Okay. It's just something that in the back of my mind that they are considered rather brutal on the European scale, I guess.
Okay. I guess in the US, you look at this, if you even seen it, and think, "Oh, this is Disneyland." Haha, funny.
Yeah, we aren't overly concerned about your level of force, but my time in Europe did teach me that the jump to the US level is big, and I have actually a question about that. I mean, we very much militarized our police. They are, suited up and all sorts of things. I mean, they look like they're headed to war on, routine police routes sometimes, depending on where you are in the country. And I just wonder, is it similar there? Are they weaponized to their eyeballs, or how does it look in France?
God no. It is no, of course not. It's very rare that someone will actually use a gun in any event in police work in France, and firing a gun is a grave occurrence. What we're talking about here, which is, I'm not saying it's not grave, it actually is. It's pretty bad. It's police brutality with those non-lethal rubber balls that were used a little bit too liberally. The grenade de désencerclement is like grenades that do smoke and discomfort, heavy discomfort, that kind of thing, that were used too liberally. It's also some demonstrators being dragged by their hair, which was shocking to see because, of course, everyone's filming everything. And there's been many instances of these things. There was one, which I think we talked about on the last episode, which was a policeman was pushing a woman that they had arrested, and another one walked in front of her and tripped her for no reason, and she fell flat on her face, which is like obviously unacceptable. So this is the kind of police brutality we're talking about. So far, no one has died. There have been some grave injuries, some pretty bad injuries, but it's bad for the civilized world, but for the US, it wouldn't make the news.
Well, I would say in the US, they are so weaponized. There tends to be a level where people won't continue messing with them, right? So and that's the problem, is they think that's the deterrent, right? Is that they are so weaponized. But we do have the right to protest and the right to peacefully assemble. So there is a lot of police around lots of things. And a recent thing that happened here, maybe you guys heard about too, was in Virginia, they were voting on some things about gun restrictions in a southern U.S. state. And so there was a lot of protesters coming from both sides, and kind of a hotbed right there. And so, yeah, we have our own version of this. Maybe it doesn't escalate to the police doing the hair pulling, but it's, we're partisan. It's us pulling each other's hair, I guess. So they have to keep the peace. It's tricky. And I did wonder what you guys thought of that same concept, or what's happening in Hong Kong with the protesters there. Are you familiar with what they're going through?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the catalyst for this for me as a gamer and a Blizzard aficionado was the issue with the Hearthstone esports pro that was caught up in that issue. We're not going to revisit it here, but certainly in Hong Kong, it is a non-democratic regime shutting down protests, and that is a different. I mean, for as bad as things get in France, which I guess they do get bad, it's not comparable. I wouldn't say it's comparable.
No.
And yeah, and another thing, which the image I have of protests in the U.S. is actually fairly tame compared to the ones in France. I thought about it when you talked about it just now, but when I think about protests in France, there is a certain degree of chaos and violence, and I'm sure there is some, violence happening in the US as well, but it doesn't seem to me like, I'm making a liar out of myself for what I just said 10 minutes ago. I don't have the image of police actually being mishandling those situations. Of course, we all know that police brutality can happen in other situations in the US, but right. In those situations, it seems like the police would be handling it better than we are in France. Now, of course, in France, it's been for 2 or 3 years, every other Sunday is a trying demonstration. So maybe the situation is a little bit different here, but yeah, certainly that's surprising to realize that I wouldn't think the U.S. police forces would be as bad as at handling those types of demonstrations over there. So,
well, one thing real quick. Oh, go ahead, Matthias.
I was just going to say, if I think about it, if you hear something about police brutality or the actions of police men and women in the US, you usually only hear in special instances. So not on a huge protest where they go at it, but it's more like there's one person who was arrested and someone was shot, or someone was, I don't know,
it's always someone was
force
shot,
or whatever it's, but it's mostly small singular instances we notice, and not like in France, like there's a huge protest and the police had a clash with demonstrators or something, protesters.
Yeah, we tend to, well, I'll just tell you the formula that gets followed here that is, I think maybe is why that happens, is that everyone has to go get a permit. So you have to get a permit to assemble. And they divide you, depending on which side you have your permit for. You can be on this side of the street or the other side of the street, and never the two shall cross. And then the police are there to just maintain that. And people pretty much follow that. We've had, obviously, it's rough, and it can be, but it's almost as if the police are the neutral part. And it sounds like in France, the police don't seem neutral in the fight. Whereas here we're fighting citizen against citizen. You guys have maybe a different fight. But really there are permits handed out. You have to have a permit or you get arrested if you're standing there. So I guess that's what they do. You mean
each individual person has to have a permit?
No. I'm sorry. The group. So you sign up as a group. I assume one person on their own standing in it's like they designate the area. You have to have a permit for the area.
Okay.
So if somebody wanted to demonstrate outside of a corporate headquarters because they're having a meeting that affected them, they would have to be so many feet away from the entrance. They'd have to stand behind a fenced thing. They could have you have a lot of rights within that space, but it's never, you never have the right to cross onto what has been designated without a permit, which probably solves some problems, but it's interesting to think about how different that is.
Yeah, we have to announce that a demonstration is going to take place and to say where you are going to go. It's a public safety issue, and you know which streets you're going to go through and all of that, and you're going to march from here to there, and you have to get it approved. Usually that's not a big problem. Obviously things often go awry from there, but again, that is not necessarily the big takeaway from what you were just saying. I think for me the big takeaway is indeed you might be fighting citizen against citizen. If there's a conflict in France during a demonstration, it's always citizens versus the police. That is, like, I have very rarely heard about two marches or two groups of demonstrators demonstrating against one another. You just do it one day and then, the other one takes the next weekend. But when conflict arises, it's citizens versus the police, and there's that confrontation that is very clearly felt. All right, let's conclude this episode with what's been making the news in Germany. If we haven't already covered all of it, I feel like all of our stories were fairly international today.
Yeah, so a lot of the news that came in over here are the ones we have been talking about. So I thought I might talk about a quote-unquote inheritance of fascism and nationalism that has been affecting people in Germany, if not on a daily basis, then I guess at least on a weekly or a monthly basis for the last 75 years. Because I wanted to talk about the thousands of tons of unexploded ordnance still lying underground all over the country, especially in the large cities. And over the course of the Second World War, the Allies dropped around... Now I'm hearing myself.
Oh, sorry. Are you hearing yourself now?
Yes.
Oh, that is weird. Okay, let me do this. And hopefully now you shouldn't be hearing yourself. Tell me if that's the case.
I'll try again. Okay, now it's okay. No, I don't hear myself anymore.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so over the course of the Second World War, the Allies dropped around 750,000 tons of bombs over Germany, and experts estimate that around 10 to 20% of these bombs were defective or didn't detonate on impact as expected. And especially the huge urban and industrial areas are affected since they were the main targets of the Allied bombing rage. So, for example, Berlin, Hamburg, Köln, München, all the large cities. But apart from that, there are also these huge amounts of ammunition and smaller devices still buried and found today, starting with something as small as grenades or mortar and artillery shells to whole ammunition dumps. And every year, around 5,000 to 6,000 bombs and incendiary devices are being diffused on average in Germany, and those numbers are rising. One reason for the rise is that there is a boom in construction, which is especially felt in the large cities. So the demand for housing is high, and that means that a lot of free areas are being used to build new houses. And during the construction, they often find these bombs lying underneath the surface. And if they find something like this, usually this means they have to evacuate the surrounding area, which is not just a disruption of your daily life if you live there, but also expensive and a logistical challenge, especially if those evacuations involve retirement homes or hospitals, and in the worst case, if you have to evacuate an intensive care unit. And out of the top of my head, I can remember two large cases this month that made the news. One was in Köln, where around 6,000 people and a part of a hospital had to be evacuated. And another one in Dortmund, where 13,000 people had to leave their homes because of disarmament. And the largest evacuation to date, I think, was on Christmas Day in 2016. There was a 1.8-ton bomb found in Augsburg, in the city center of Augsburg, and that prompted the evacuation of 54,000 people on December 25th, which was considered the biggest bomb-related evacuation in Germany in post-war history. So it's something that's coming up a lot these days. One of the more spectacular finds was a bomb in Munich in 2012, and this one was deemed unsafe for transport. They had to explode it on site in the middle of the city, and even though the experts and the fire department were trying to minimize the damage by dampening the sites with large amounts of straw and other things, the explosion shattered windows and over a wide area and caused structural damage to the buildings with the costs in the millions. And these pictures were quite spectacular because one, it was after dark, so it was a big fire show, and the straw they used to dampen this made a huge mess all over the place because it caused several fires in the aftermath. And if I think back to last year, there was a incident that made the news and a lot of on social media especially. There was a field near a town that had an undetected aerial bomb beneath, and that went off in the middle of the night, creating a crater 10 meters in diameter and 4 meters deep. And the thing is, this field has been plowed and sowed over for the last 75 years without anyone realizing that there was a huge bomb right underneath it, and it was only luck that the device went off in the middle of the night and no one was injured. So that's still an ongoing problem to this day. And to link this to another topic, a hot topic, in fact, the climate change, pun intended, the effects of extreme weather are also facilitating the problem, because during the long dry summers of the last 2 years, for example, the water levels of several rivers and lakes dropped dramatically, and that exposed a lot of bombs that were lying underwater and now were lying in the open, and the heat also made the devices unstable. And if that all wasn't bad enough, there is the danger of forest fires, because if that happens in an area with a lot of old ammunition, they can go off at random for once. And it also poses a significant risk for the firefighters, and it prevents them from getting into certain areas, as it happened in 2018 in Brandenburg. They simply couldn't fight forest fires in some areas because it was too dangerous, because there was so much unused or underexploded ammunition in the area. They could just not risk sending people in there, and they had to let it burn down. Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, that's not limited to Germany. Of course, if you go back like 100 years in the First World War, it was mainly fought in Belgium and parts of France on the Western Front, and it devastated whole areas which are uninhabitable to this day because of the unexploded ordnance and the contamination due to chemical agents, or really every other major conflict in the last century. Think Vietnam, think Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, whatever it is, you name it, there are still so much remnants of unexploded ordnance and mines, and it's a huge mess. And even in a country like Germany, 75 years later, it's still such a huge problem, and it's only getting worse, because as time goes by, those bombs start to deteriorate further and further and are becoming a greater hazard.
So let me ask you this. It's certainly a problem everywhere, and in France as well, if we go back to World War I. But it seems to me, and that's an impression as a European, and as, hearing what you say sometimes on this show, it seems to me that the shadow of World War II is still very much present in the German psyche for obvious reasons, and maybe also for reasons like this one, which brings it back into memory all the time, maybe in a way that it is not as present in other European countries, which were also very much affected by World War II and by Germany's party status. Is that fair to say that World War II is a constant part of German culture and psyche today, or is that just an impression?
I think so, because as we're recording this week was the 75-year anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, which was all over the media for obvious reasons. And there is certain movement, I guess, or especially on the far right. They try to argue, well, that was so long ago, and we today have nothing to do with this. We are not responsible for it. So it's time to get past this. And on the other hand, we still have survivors of the Holocaust, and we still have a few people alive today who were alive during the Second World War, but these numbers are diminishing. So I guess it's not as present in the conscious, in the conscious of everybody as it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. But we still have it as a very integral part. And as you said, it's mostly World War II for obvious reasons. And World War I, even though it was like the 100-year anniversary just a few years ago, is not that much in the minds of everybody in comparison to World War II.
So when you say they say it's time to get past it, what do they mean? Like, how do you actually get past it? Do you just not beat yourself over the head over it anymore, or
That's a good question that you should ask someone who is saying that, because no one really, well, it's mostly we need to feel guilty about this. It's something along those lines, or the obvious reason, if you have anything about Israel, for example, that they always complain, well, we can't approach our opinion or our relations to Israel in comparison to this, what happened 75 years ago.
Okay, so let me take the other side of this. When will it be okay to not feel responsible for it anymore?
Well, it's not, in my opinion,
not yet.
It's not about, no, in my opinion, it's not about feeling responsible. It's more, I'm not sure who said it. It was one of the Holocaust survivors who said it. And was talking to a group of people, probably young people, and he said, you are not responsible for what happened, but you're responsible that it never happens again. And I think that's the essence, basically, for you can't forget it, because you always need to remind yourself this is what can happen, and it has happened, and it probably will happen again, and you need to be vigilant enough that it never happens again. So that's, for me at least, is the approach I'm taking, because the statement "we are not responsible" is true. I wasn't born, my parents weren't born during the Second World War, so we can't do anything about it. We couldn't prevent it or anything, but we can work that it never happens again. So that's the difference, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. Then I know you are a little bit of a crazy leftist in the eyes of some of our more right-wing friends. Would you say it's we're down the path of it happening again? Because it seems to me like you're worried about it, like not just as a theoretical potentiality from the future. You're actually worried about what's happening in the world today and in Germany today. Do you think we're down that path?
If you ask that question, it's always the difference between will it happen the same way again or something similar. I don't think that we'll see concentration camps again in Germany or in any other country like they happened during World War II. But the sentiment around that you have a group of people who you blame or for everything, or the sentiment that you try to discriminate against a certain group of people just because of their birth, of their religion, of whatever they believe in. That's the problem I am seeing, and I think it's like discrimination more than the actual threat of life. But again, I am neither Jewish nor I'm part of a minority, so I'm from the privileged side, so I can't really say it's not going to happen again or it's not happening today, because there is discrimination, everyday racism or whatever in Germany as well, and people are experiencing it. But I'm lucky enough that I don't have to face this personally, but that makes me responsible to stand up for those people and try to prevent anything like this from happening again.
I want to push back a little bit, just because you know me and I like to take the other side of things. But I completely agree and respect with what you're saying, because I think you have the right outlook on these things. What I was kind of, it's not like I was trying to trick you, but asking legitimate questions, and I think your answers make a lot of sense. But do you think that racism or discrimination is necessarily leading down that again path of not exactly the same thing, but something that would be equally worrisome? Or because it might seem to some, possibly me, that yes, there is a little bit of discrimination and a little bit of racism, and it's always been there, and it will always be there, more importantly. And not every time we witness it does it mean that, you know, a new form of totalitarian regime is coming into place, you know?
The easy answer would be, I don't know what is going to happen. So I can't really answer the question. But the problem I'm seeing would be, one, I don't want to institutionalize anything, or don't want it to be... I hesitate to use the term political correct because that's overused, and the implication of political correctness in this context. But I don't want it to be okay to talk or about certain, for example, ethnic minorities in a certain way, and I don't want it to be okay or normal that you use racism in your everyday life. So that's the main issue. Again, I don't think you have to go to the extreme of concentration camps for something bad to happen.
Right.
There's a lot in between. And what I myself think is, I don't want this movement, slow creeping movement towards something bad. And for me, I just want to make put a clear line in the sand and say this far and no further, so to speak.
So you don't
if that makes any sense.
No, it does very much so. The way I understand it is, if we're starting to normalize racism and to make it acceptable and discrimination, then that's already part of the battle that's lost, and you don't like that where that's going.
And for example, just coming back to Israel, that's something you often hear, that people try to use the approach, well, if you remember what happened 75 years ago, you can't criticize Israel anymore. And that's the extreme position no one is really taking. Because, of course, you can criticize Israel as you can criticize any other country, any other government, any other whatever. The difference is that you can't, how shall I put this? That you can't have different measurements. I don't know. You can have different standards in at Israel in comparison to every other country. So you can't be overzealous when you say, well, Israel can't do anything in Palestine because don't you remember what happened to you 75 years ago? That would be something that would be anti-Semitic in this case. I would say that's not okay. But if I say, well, what Israel is doing in Palestine, just as an example, is a violation of human rights. I'm not talking about any specific, just abstract here. Then it would be okay for me.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. Thank you for indulging my contrarian tendencies. Wendy, you've been very kindly quiet in the background. Is there anything you want to add before we conclude this episode? I'll give you the last words.
Oh my. Well, first of all, that's a heavy topic. And really important one. I did have a question just in everyone's experience, and Matthias, maybe yours in particular. When I travel anywhere as an American, I get certain responses to me automatically. I don't have to do anything to get them, and or questions that are, especially for those who've never traveled here or maybe don't have a lot of contact with other Americans. And I could talk about those things. I'm just wondering, for both of you, what happens to you? I can imagine being German, there's specific things that happen, maybe being French. And I find that fascinating because Matthias is defending lots of things and having to talk about, representing all the people and all their attitudes and what do we do? And, and that's a tricky card. And I just wonder, have you been in that position as you've traveled or interacted with others based on, oh, you're French, so blink, blink, blink.
I think that for me, I'll let Matthias go second. But for me, because I don't have a lot to say about it, most reactions are people go, ho, 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 oui, oui. And like, seriously, that is the most common thing. And I kind of, it doesn't really annoy me anymore, but it's like, it is kind of dumb. But I'm sure I do it about other people. So I don't know. It's just the way the world works. The thing that does bother me a little bit, even though we do it playfully sometimes, is the surrender monkeys thing with the French. If you talk about it seriously, if you have any knowledge of French history, and even of recent history, it's not that simple, and it is difficult conversations and difficult times, and it's I don't know, it feels it bothers me a little bit, not to the point that it actually bothers me, but it does bother me a little bit, and that is a very common thing. But I don't know, I you know what? I was going to say, I joke about the Americans all being cowboys and eating hamburgers all the time, but I don't really. I might make a joke here and there, but I don't really do that like on a regular basis. The French thing with the hon 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 and the surrender monkeys, like you can bet that maybe that's a little bit, maybe it's changed in the past. You know what? This is what Trump has done for the world. He's degraded the image of the US so much that people in the past couple of years have stopped doing that thing that I was talking about to me as a French person, because they don't, feel it's appropriate to make fun of other populations anymore, I suppose. So thank you, Donald Trump.
We should make a list of things we're grateful for.
There's one item. That's it. Yeah. Matthias, what about you?
So where is your baguette and where's the wine bottle? That's the two stereotypes you forgot.
The thing is, the baguette, and maybe it's because I don't live in France anymore. I've not lived in France for a few times, but those I would receive with pride, because holy crap, other countries don't know how to make bread, and they might know how to make wine. That's, I can admit to that, but ours is really good too. But bread, no, it's not.
I will contest the bread thing, because if there's something with bread, Germans have it. So it's not baguette, but we have so much bread. I'm contesting that heavily.
Well, I mean, it's not about the quantity, it's about the quality.
No. The quality and the variety. You're forgetting the variety.
That's not as well. First of all, I might dispute that variety claim as well. You know what? We have to meet up somewhere in Europe, either Germany or France, and have a bread showdown at some point.
All right, I'm up for it.
I love it.
Wendy will come over and be the judge.
And I will tell you right now, you will win every bread contest. There is no good bread in this whole country.
No, I meant you'll be the judge. You'll be the judge between Germany and France.
Yeah, I'd love to. I would love to.
All right.
I was going to say really quick, and then Matthias, you can answer yours. But I would just say really quick. My experience has often been they want to know if I know any
gun.
Famous. Yeah, gun is definitely the question. Do you own a gun? Honestly, I've maybe seen one 40 years ago, 30 years ago, it's not in my common life or whatever. But often what I find is that there is this pull, this love-hate dynamic that I'm always answering to or talking about. And I get it. I love hate America too. It's really a tricky thing. And I'm fascinated because I feel like I've only lived in my own experience and know what that's like. And I know people have angry feelings towards my country, and rightfully so in a lot of cases. And then there's also this love, and people appreciate our warmth and friendliness, but that also means we're shallow. And there's all sorts of fun stuff to navigate, which I find just fascinating. And
I love hate France and America as well. So
yeah, everyone love hate.
Yeah, and just for the record, I love French baguette and especially the croissants. So there's nothing to compare that. I give you that one.
All
so
right,
graciously.
thank you. Very gracious. Yes, very gracious.
But to answer your question, Wendy, there are two different parts to this. One, I remember when I was in school, every school had an exchange program with France. So at a certain age, you go to France for a week or two in an exchange. And I remember people going there telling me, yeah, well, when they showed up at the village center, the youth there said Heil Hitler and greeted them like that. So the typical stereotype you would expect, of course. And on the other hand, if you ask if I go to another country, what are the response people give me? It depends where. I think that is something the EU and Europe has done for us, because if I go to Italy, to the Netherlands, even to France, it's not that typical response you expect. What was it about World War II, or what was it about Hitler? Because it's so normal that you see people from other countries that you don't think about those stereotypes anymore in your everyday life, I guess. So if I go to Italy and I talk to someone, they just talk normal to me. Okay, they do the what do you like the pasta? What do we have in Germany, for example? That would be something I would expect if I go to Italy and talk to someone, but not. Right. Well, do you remember what happened in 1945? That never happened to me, actually. So
yeah, I think that's a very common thing, is the proximity to those minorities, populations, people you have preconceptions about, the proximity. And I think it was you, Wendy, who said that about refugees, and when you were working with them in Sweden, when you actually start knowing people, it completely annihilates, like it destroys usually the way you thought about that before. And it shows how artificial that is, or shallow, or I don't know, but yeah. All right. Well, sorry, what?
I just said thanks. Thanks for answering my question.
And thank you for being on the show, both Wendy and Matthias. That's going to be it for today. If people want more from you, Matthias, are you still active on Twitter?
I'm still active on Twitter. You can find me there under the handle Matzekult, Matzekult. And if you're using Mastodon, you can find me under the same handle on the instance chaos.social.
Perfect. Wendy, still on Instagram with the kids being hip?
I got a puppy, so I literally do nothing now besides potty train. And so it's Wendy with an I, Dunford, on Instagram. And therapythursdays.com if you want to see. I'm actually a therapist, not just a news junkie. So lots more going on there.
Interesting. Excellent. Well, maybe we'll talk about that more at some point in the future. For me, it's Not Patrick on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And you can find this show at FrenchSpin.com. And of course, if you enjoy it, if you think it's valuable, then you can support it at patreon.com/the Phileas Club. The link is in the show notes, and it takes about 2 minutes to contribute. So thank you so much to those who already do. And if you don't, then maybe consider it. If you've been listening for a little while and you like what you hear, then patreon.com/the Phileas Club. Thank you so much, and we'll be back in about 15 days-ish, I hope, with another episode. I'm going to try to make it happen, of our Brexit saga. After what happens in 2 days, I'm sure we'll have very interesting discussions. Talk to you then. Bye.